So I'll kick off with the first question. If you can start thinking of questions, we've got the mics, and we're going to do quite a quick fire round so that we get answers to everything. So try and keep it nice and short. Quick question then. If we're looking at pornography, typically when we talk about people who have encountered issues with pornography, we tend to look either as the females as victims of pornography or the males in terms of the addiction. And I think that's why I wanted to have such a mixed panel, because both people, both genders and whatever other genders in between, can actually be victims and also empowered by their sex practices. I'd like to have a quick word from each of you about what you think that looks like, or anything around that subject.
I'll start. I mean, more women are actually now presenting with an addiction to pornography or an addiction to sex. So in a sense, I think the tides are turning, and I think women feel more liberated and less ostracized to actually do what men do.
Interesting. Yvette, what would you like to say about that maybe?
I think the problem we have, I'm not 100% sure about that, but I myself feel strongly misrepresented, stigmatized as a sexual woman, and I can see how mainstream pornography might be not always in my best interest. But I do strongly believe that when we change our beginning or ideas about sexuality to start with, not just like hop in what porn does wrong, but how we define sexuality and how we relate to sexuality from young age on, and what the stories which we tell to each other, it could be really empowering.
I think what's interesting with that, certainly from a young age, I remember before the internet, I was about, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and most of my friends were boys at that point. We'd go off to the field behind school, and there'd always be like this, pretty grim, there'd always be this like this forest bit, the hedge, there'd always be a hedge, and these soggy porn magazines, and we'd all sit there and be like, oh, look at this, and there is this sense of curiosity that I think is actually really, I found it to be very delightful, because at that age you're not seeing, and certainly at that period in time, you're not seeing stuff which is which is debasing someone, so without their consent, something that could be considered quite extreme. And one of my concerns is that there's this level of equivalence now when you go online, when you reach a porn site, where you'll see kind of regular porn, if you're lucky, next to something which could actually be very hardcore. And that there's that equivalence that's created across those different pieces of content.
Well, we sort of went around we went around a lot of schools in the UK, sort of 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, and we sort of said to them, what sort of porn are you watching? And the amazing thing that came out of that, because the problem is with kids, right? It's not with like old farts like me. Like, I know what's right and wrong, or try. You know, it's when your brain isn't fully formed and you've got no kind of prefrontal cortex. You know, the bit that says stop. Hey, is that a good thing to do? It's not even online, and so they're getting. It's being normalised. They're being sex educated by pornography, which is the worst place to be educated. So. Well, you would disagree, of course, because you make ethical porn, and that's why you're doing what you're doing, because you're trying to go against this tide of, you know, the so-called corrosive porn, which is affecting male sexuality. But the thing about our TV show is that we wanted to try and show that it wasn't, because the narrative had always been porn is great for guys and it's crap for girls. That was always the narrative. And we were like saying, well, hang on a minute, these young men, they would hate to call themselves victims, but they were on the sort of suffering end too. And we put forward this kind of narrative that young guys were also, you know, feeling the pinch. And that went down terribly badly in the feminist quarters. Like, how dare you say that men are suffering? Well, I think we found out that some were.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll move to Robert.
I would like a two-way comment. First of all, I think it's really true what you say, because when it comes to that men are or are not victims, because especially with my Porn for Women research, we've been creating this term that's inclusive for what women want, but there's barely ever done like a proper textual analysis porn studies on what men want. And we're not sure if from the beginning on men are into this hardcore anal scenes. We don't know that, and I think it's a waste of a lot of knowledge.
I think it'd be interesting to ask you, because I certainly, we interviewed also a lot of experts, anti-pornographers, sexual psychotherapists, criminal psychologists who work with some of the most violent sex criminals in the UK. And I wanted to know the answer, is porn sending these guys, into sexual criminals? And my experience, of working with, 19 of them was the answer was no for them. But it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I suppose for me, most of the men I end up seeing have started off with normal porn. The behaviour often escalates. They need something which is more risky, which is a bit much darker, and it often leads to sometimes some pretty dark areas. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of young men now who present with what we call situation ejaculatory problem, which means that they're so used to masturbating to pornography that you put someone in front of them, they become so anxious that they can't actually have sex with a human being anymore. And almost all the young men I see under 30 years old, that is the problem they present with.
But isn't this the problem with all sorts of addiction? I mean, people don't start off doing heroin, right, straight away?
Probably not.
And when you have a very heavily heroin addicted person, you would probably also have trouble interfering on a social level with people around him.
Probably, but I only work in the area of sex addiction. So I take your point about heroin, but for me. But coming back to the point about women being victims, I suppose, the porn industry is owned by men. So I can see the feminist view, which I understand, that actually women are victims, because most of the porn industry is probably not owned by women itself.
Although what I find really interesting and quite exciting, and this is, there's a new documentary that I did a bit of a documentary interview thing for The Drum, called The Big Turn On, that looks at sex tech. And what's amazing is that we've been concentrating on porn. Like, men sort out porn and they're creating the distribution platforms, and it's a very male industry, and we've basically conflated that with the sex industry. And we're missing an entire picture over here where I think it was something as high as 80 to 90% of people who run sex tech, teledildonics, dildos, vibrators, all this kind of tech machine, it's women, because men aren't going to design stuff for women, so you get women designing stuff for women. Okay. So there's this other half of the industry that we've completely forgotten about, which is run by women, that's now migrating into the adult sort of entertainment industry, like the Cindy Gallups of this world.
Yeah, even big producers have I think, Playgirl TV, I'm not sure. I should check that. But there are like a lot of big producers who are being led by female general managers. Abby Winters was led by a female general manager.
You made a great point earlier about the Tinderization and how young men, or the guys I work with, are just kind of, the objectification, and porn is kind of like hyper dehumanizing the web in that sense. It really is. It's like, there's a girl, I want that, I'm going to go and get that. And I'm seeing a new thing now where on the one end we've got people like Callum and Gaza who are having loads of porn sex or seeing escorts, and then the rest of us in the middle are having less sex because we're masturbating more often. And then at the far end, the latest thing I'm starting to see is young guys who don't feel they can compete on Snapchat. God, these guys are all like ripped and they're buff, they've got amazing bodies, they look like porn stars. Look at me, I don't. And I know that I'll get a swipe the wrong way on Tinder. This is fucking it's overwhelming. I can't handle this. These guys are checking out. They're just masturbating and watching video games. It's happened in Japan. That they're called the herbivores, and they bring shame to the nation, because here's a traditional masculine society where men are meant to be careerists, strong, and all this. And these young Japanese kids now, they're just watching video games. They're playing Minecraft. They're wanking. They're quite happy to be middle of the road and humdrum. They've got girlfriends, but they don't sexualise them. And it's moving to Europe, and it's being fueled, I think, by a more corrosive attitude towards young men as potential sex cases, which is being fueled on university campuses, the fear of the rape culture. There's a whole sexual politic that porn is a mere part of, and I think it's becoming an overwhelming world for young men.
But following on from your point, Martin, I mean, you do have the healthy users of porn versus the vulnerable users. And there lies the problem. You also have an age generation where young men probably in their 20s become addicted to porn, some of them. You have men who move on to their 30s when they have more money. They go offline and they go on actually to prostitutes. I mean, I've just recently completed a group there were 7 men, they're all in their 40s, all addicted to sleeping with prostitutes. They don't look at porn anymore. They have the resources, financially they can afford it, so the behavior escalates, they need more and more. So there's something also to do with people's age and opportunity and finances, which the behaviours seem to move further on.
Is the sort of big question I asked you earlier, is this kind of endless access to digital variety and pornography making it, it's never been easier to get laid?
Yeah.
But is it becoming really hard to fall in love?
I don't know about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
of-
think it's
I don't
the
think it's ever
accessibility
easy to
to endless diversity is absolutely, from the point where I'm in the industry, it's absolutely not true. Because we do have the hubs, the porn hubs, where you have like a variety of sexual practices. But then again, when you look in the feminist scene, it's really hard for independent feminist porn makers or independent porn makers to be accessible for the bigger public, and especially when we talk about young people who do not have completely their brain already in place. When you're 15 years old and you're interested in sexual explicit material, you're gonna look up porn, and then you just dive into the world of the porn hubs. It's for independent makers, it's impossible to sell to get their stuff out there. So I would say that there is a lot of variety and diversity that's being unseen, especially the porn that is maybe more empowering and more negotiating intimacy and sexual consent.
But it's back to the kind of ethical cocaine thing. I mean, I know ethical pornographers who just get into raging arguments with radical feminists who say, how can porn be ethical? How can cocaine be ethical? It's porn or it's coke. They're both wrong.
But there's always going to be
so much
an
kind of
argument.
fracture.
Yeah, but I think we should let go of this idea that porn is wrong, because
I agree with you, by the way.
what is porn? I think porn is a representation of human sexuality, and there's nothing wrong with human sexuality. And I think when we're going to start embrace that and try to enhance a healthy, for what that means, a healthy sexual representation, instead of just fighting porn as a whole, we're growing so much stronger as a sexual society.
I suppose for me, the view I've taken...
Just come up and grab a mic.
The view I've taken is that some people can use porn healthily,
Yes.
and for others it's problematic. That is simple.
Yeah.
So rather than forming a judgment, that's kind of how I look
of
at
course.
it.
It's exactly the same as alcohol. What I found was, the problems were, the prohibition, and there's a lot of faith issues here, like Catholic faith, Muslim faith, Jewish faith, a lot of kind of guilt and fire and brimstone at this end. And then down this end, it's like here's the drink, here's the keys to the drink cabinet. So here's your laptop, bugger off, I'm watching EastEnders.
Okay.
and that's where the problems are. And the rest of the kids, quite fine. I'm not an anti-pornographer.
I want to suggest that it might not all be about sex.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not about sex at all.
Well, I think sometimes it's about sex, but I think it's a lot about anxiety.
Yeah.
So you have a highly sensual, distracting experience, and someone's going to choose this highly distracting sexual experience. Somebody else is going to choose coke. Somebody else is going to choose cat videos. Somebody else is going to, climb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the process content distinction for me. So I think you can't. There's a sex consequence. But a lot of people are just they can't bear to be with themselves.
Yeah.
They're distracting
And
themselves.
the funny thing was, as well, is that the heaviest porn users that I worked with and met and know, they weren't using porn when they were in a good place.
Yeah. Correct. They normally don't.
Yeah, they go into porn when they're depressed or low or anxious. It's something to shut off from.
But don't you think with stuff like this, speaking as a woman who is sexual, I find it a great stress buster. Have a cheeky little wank, and you're going to be fine. Your performance go up. And so there are ways to there are reasons why we self-medicate with food, with touch, with being with friends, with singing, with dancing, with sex. So when does that become an unhealthy behaviour?
When it's repetitive, when it distracts you from normal daily life. So, for example, if you're supposed to go for dinner, and you decide not to go for dinner because you decide to stay at home and spend 4 hours masturbating on the internet, that's when it becomes a problem. You've got a presentation tomorrow morning at work at 10 o'clock and you're up until 4 a.m. looking at that next click, trying to get that next click, and you haven't ejaculated it 5 hours later. That's when it becomes a problem.
And it's interesting, every time I do a presentation with Gaza, I'm approached by people in the audience who've come to watch, but they're also sex addicts. And more of these people are female. As you said, Paula Hall, who's very well-known sex addiction therapist. You've trained with her, right? She's saying that her theory is it's about half-half, but there's too much stigma and shame around female sexuality to present. So it's the guys who think, okay, it's fine, boys use porn, I'll go and get help. Whereas the girls are thinking, well, I can't, it's too much shame.
So let's talk about shame. Sorry, go ahead, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, so I still keep asking myself and you guys as well. Is then the problem? Is it the substance you're using, or is it the fact that you need to have a substance?
It's a very good question. Is it the substance or you need the substance? Well, you don't need the substance.
No, but like from addiction perspective, that you're not able to be with yourself and therefore look for something else. It could be.
Well, I think it links into privacy as well. Like I think people are entitled to a private sexual life even from their partners. Yeah. So your partner's not going to be able to satisfy every whim that you have.
Correct.
Depending on what arrangement you have with your partner, you're not necessarily going to go out and find it. Some arrangements will allow for that. And if you can get your kicks that way through wanking and fantasy and pornography in a way that does the job but doesn't turn into what you're describing, I think there's kind of a right to that.
So there lies the problem. If you are in a relationship where you can comfortably talk about those things and negotiate them, that is normally okay. Well, that is actually okay. What you often find is people don't tend to do this because they're fearful of being rejected, and they start doing this in secrecy. And when you have secret and shame together, those two things equals addiction. Because you're carrying the shame because of what you're doing, and you make it secretive, and that becomes intoxicating and intensifying.
And the self-loathing.
And the self-loathing, and that's where the problems are. So, if you can comfortably say to your partner, well, I'd like you to pee on me, and if you can negotiate that, the partner said, well, no, I don't really want to do that. He said, do you mind me paying someone to do it? The partner says, okay. There's no harm done.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
there you go.
Yeah, mindful
so that's
negotiation.
Basically, if we get rid of the taboos around sexuality, we will have less problem with pornography.
Yeah. Well, also, if we feel more comfortable and confident within ourselves to ask for what we need and to be able to verbalize the things we need in our own relationships, that's half the job done.
Well, I think part of that is also to do with, especially around shame. So, and women and men have shame in different ways. So I think you were touching on how men typically don't perceive themselves as a victim within the sexual context of pornography. So being able to perhaps leave labels aside and actually just say, I need some help, this is actually affecting me badly now, someone come help me. And with the women, I think with the stigmatization of being actively sexual, and you're getting all these books coming out now, Sex at Dawn, you had Vagina, What Do Women Want, looking at how a society would not have to work so hard to repress something if it were passive, i.e. the female sexual drive. But I think what's interesting about pornography is it's forcing us now to actually educate our children.
Yeah, but that's not happening.
But it has to happen at some point,
When the TV
right?
show was made, I was called in by the Home Office. You'd be a great guy to talk to kids. Because you edited loaded, they don't think you're a stiff, and you come into a school, you'd be gone tomorrow. I said, great, I'm up for that. Nothing happened. It's like lip service. I do it now because I'm self-employed and I go to schools. I go and I talk to young boys and girls about this, and I've worked with them, and they just say, we just want people to talk to us about this.
But you have to educate the parents, though.
Yeah, the parents are the ones who oppose. The
parents are the one who oppose it happening in schools.
Yeah.
So it's also got something to do with law, right? I mean, in the Netherlands, I don't know how the law is here, but you're not allowed, or it's a crime to show underage people pornography and to have an open discussion about the content of pornography. And I think that's problematic as well, because you will, as how we educate our children with media, like you watch a very violent movie, and you're going to watch it together, and you're going to explain to your kid, this is real, this is not real, this is how the real world works.
But there's a reason that you've got such an amazing attitude about sexuality, and that is Holland leads the world in sex education. You've got a concept called spring fever. You start teaching your kids at 5 and 6. And they're told about which parts of the body are intimate and which it's not okay to be touched, and it's not okay to take photographs of. You guys have got the lowest incidence of STDs in Europe. You've got the highest first age of sexual contact in Europe, and you've got the lowest incidence of teen pregnancies in Europe, because your sex education works, and we want it here. And we can't get it, and we need it.
We can't get a European drinking culture either.
Or the sun. If we could just have the sun, it would solve all of our problems.
That's why you're amazing. You've been cultured in this sex-positive environment where there's no fear and shame.
I'm not. Yeah, you say that. I'm not seeing that all around me. I must say.
Maybe it wasn't operational when you were there, but it is for the kids. But it is for the kids now. The kids that are coming through, amazing. We want that.
But it's about context, right? So if she's used to.
He's absolutely right about Holland. First of all,
All right, so we've got break in 5 minutes. I don't know how engrossed you are. I want to keep going, but it's also quite warm. So I was thinking we either do a quick fire round for 5 minutes and we get we're going to get a 1-sentence answer. It's such an interesting, complex subject. Or we can go 10 minutes, 5 minutes into break, and do a few more questions. What would you prefer? Hands up for 5 minutes and break? Hands up for 10 minutes? All right, okay, so let's pick. You're going to go back down? Are you sure?
Yeah.
No, it's fine. We might as well get our money's worth. You can sit back down. And you have a very interesting perspective. So, quick questions. First at the back, and then one over here. We'll take maybe 5 questions and see how we get on. Go for it. I think the mic's not on. Can we put the mic on? Let's try again. Yeah, just keep speaking, they'll put the volume up.
Test where you have, on a normal movie, you have to have 2 women who talk to each other about something that's not related to a man. Is there some sort of similar test in pornography to see if it supports the presentation of women or men?
As far as I don't think we have a test like that.
Well, when I sort of sat down with a guy called, the world's foremost anti-pornographer is a woman called Gail Dines. She wrote a book called Pornland, and she's vehemently against pornography. Although, you know, when she was turned on to campaign against porn in the 80s by a magazine called Hustler, they had a woman going through a meat grinder. That was the moment she became an anti-pornographer. She would give the world to go back to that porn, because porn has changed. Her husband, a guy called David Levi, he is an expert on the business of porn. Porn is presented by software. The algorithms works out what works. There's a reason no porn is watched for longer than 9 minutes. It's a science.
Is there a rating system to judge?
No, there's no age check anywhere. They're pushing at the moment for compulsory age verification on porn that's hosted within the UK, but nobody wants to give their credit card. I mean, talk about all the trust stuff. I mean, pornographers could probably learn from the Silk Road. If it meant that there was some way of checking people's age, even anonymously, that would give it kind of, no license to be more acceptable, it should be explored, because everybody knows, the Children's Commissioner, the NSPCC, it's age 10, 9, kids are watching porn for when they're 9 and 10.
Or 8.
Yeah, boys, beg your pardon, although it is girls too, 80-20. But the point is, they're learning about sex from porn when they're 10.
But then again, I think we should also not forget that people are different, and people crave or desire different things. So to say, well, in this movie, this woman gets objectified, and so it's not okay. There are a lot of women who have a fantasy about objectification, and for all good reason. Film is still like not the real world, and we should not forget that pornography is also fiction, and we have that in place to live fantasies that cannot always be lived in real life.
The thing that I want to try and get in is the point, where men think it's okay to be violent in the real world. That's what worries me, and I think we should use pornography as a starting point for a positive conversation, a 21st century conversation about sexual consent. We say to our boys, as dads, as fathers, as consumers of porn, don't do it like that, son. My dad taught me not to beat women up because we saw people in the streets with black eyes. I came from a tough part of Nottingham. My dad was a coal miner. I can still see it now. Fathers leading the way. You can't stop porn, so why don't we use it?
To educate. Let's take another question. Who's got a question? So we've got Jeff and then this lady. So let's go with this lady because she had her hand first, and then we'll go to Jeff. How are the sound levels? Can you all hear okay? Okay, excellent.
Is this on? Okay, great.
Hey, Bridget.
Hello. I wanted to actually go on sort of a different topic, but something that both Robert and Aaron had sort of mentioned around apps and like the different way people engage in terms of relationships and intimacy via technology versus in person. So you mentioned, Robert, around this idea of infidelity, the definition expanding when you have all these other opportunities for, in a sense, a way that you can have a virtual relationship with someone that may or may not be in the real world. I'm just curious about people's thoughts around that topic. I don't know how clear that was, but...
I suppose when you think back about infidelity would probably consist of being with someone else. If you think of online affairs now, A man can have an online affair with someone who he's never met. He doesn't actually know if it's male or female. And so that's, in a sense, change, I think, infidelity. And you could also be just simply looking at pornography, and the partner may feel, actually, you've been cheating on them because they feel that there is someone else in between the two of you. So I think with online technology, it is now viewed very different.
Any other comments around apps and how it's changing our relationship to intimacy, fidelity?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of young men who just are very commitment phobic, because this whole thing, there's an app called Plenty of Fish. The mindset is now Plenty of Fish. So why should I, commit to this woman? Because there's loads more around the corner. If it fucked up with her, I'll get another one.
And they're always looking for somebody else.
Yeah, whereas the girls are like saying, well, hang on a minute, these guys keep cheating on me. I know so many beautiful women who can't hang on to guys because all they do is fuck around on their phones.
But the women are also doing the same.
They are, and that's it. And the women are having real life sex encounters, aren't they? We're seeing a real mushroom of women who just want sex with strangers. It takes two to tango.
Yes, who could possibly allow women to want to have sex with hot strangers?
What I'm saying is, in the middle, we're all having children later. We're not getting married.
I don't think it's a problem in and of itself.
Well, I also see something else. I also see Kingsters finding each other on a much easier level than they did before. People who have very specific desires and very specific wishes, finding each other through apps and being not so goddamn lonely because they want something they cannot get in their own environment. I think that's the other side of online sexuality. It's so much. And we know that from how homosexuality has been discussed over the years, that as soon as you find your own people, you're in a much healthier place.
And just to be a little bit controversial as well, that we can't be around sex, can we? Controversial.
Yes, let's please. That's the point.
There's so much of it because it's representative of a very human thing.
Yeah.
And that we can get a bit Disney about what relationships should look like and what we expect about relationships. And I believe in a good negotiated relationship, but people objectify each other sexually. It's part of the limbic system, it's part of the animal brain. In the world of fantasy, we are creating human images of stuff that we don't like. You see it in the Saw movies with violence, you see it in X Factor with shame, you see it in pornography with objectification. So in a way, I think we also have to accept that it's part of who we are, that these images are being consumed massively.
And there's liberation for women too. I'm writing for the Sunday Times this week about the explosion in male escorts who are providing 50 Shades sex for women who want it. They've read the book, they've seen the movie, hey, I want a bit of that. Their husbands, well, that might scare the life out of them. So they're paying to be, they're going out and these guys are in like 10 grand a month.
From my discussions with a lot of women who are very interested in doing their own careers, so you alpha type women, although I don't think there's types, but it's towards the end of the spectrum. I'm finding a lot of women who are ending up in relationships with men who want vanilla sex, which is fine, and who are not able to have this wide vocabulary of sexual desire and practice and the rest of it. And now, because women have suddenly encountered through literature this, cliterature as they call it, through 50 Shades, suddenly you've got women all over the world going, oh, hang on, I can ask for this stuff. And there is a completely new territory out there that I can discover, and
Female
that's exciting.
empowerment, you could argue that.
If it's something that the woman desires to explore with someone who's going to respect her boundaries according to how they negotiate it, then absolutely yes. But I think what's been hidden is that, well, I know it's caused all sorts of other problems. I don't want to take over the conversation. Let's have one more question, and then we're going to go to the break. Who wants to have the last question? All right, Jeff. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry.
Thanks. It's quite a specific question for Yvette, actually. I mean, obviously, on YouTube, you can create your own videos, upload them, create a channel. If your channel is successful enough, you'll get a revenue share of the money. There are obviously the pornographic versions of YouTube. You mentioned Pornhub and so on, most of which are owned by one particular company. Is it the case that you can create your content, upload it yourself to those sites and get some kind of revenue split from them? Or is that a closed system, a walled garden?
No, it's very. Oh, was it a question for me? Oh, yeah. No, it's very. I must say that I do not exactly know what the business model is, but as far as I know, the business model is that tube sites are advertorial sites for bigger companies, and as an amateur, you can upload your own stuff. But as soon as you brand your own amateur stuff, you need to pay to put it online.
all the experience that we saw was of user-generated content, to use that phrase, was being being aggregated by who knows who, normally in Eastern Europe, places like that, and then it was being supplied to the big porn hubs, and they just weren't. It's a bit like, where are these T-shirts made? Don't really want to know. So it was going to them, and they're using it and monetizing it and going back to the aggregates. But in terms of individuals uploading porn and making money, to my knowledge, that's not happening.
Well, there is a very good example from Cindy Gallop, Make Love Not Porn, where you can upload your own. It's a very specific website, and you pay to be on there as a consumer, and you can upload your own stuff and sell that. So there is an opportunity, but it's very new, and I think that's still the best thing if you want to create ethical porn or porn that's more meaningful. Start paying for your porn.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up, and I'm going to thank my panelists. Thank you, Martin, Yvette, Robert, and... Surprise panelists. I know. Surprise panelists, Aaron.